A month ago, Konami polled fans to ask them which Metal Gear game should be remade after MGS3. It is clear with an auteur like Kojima absent, Konami is hellbent to revive their IPs through the remakes. Delta, Snake Eater, Silent Hill 2, and now Silent Hill 1, and although in the business perspective, this is probably the best decision for Konami, I can't help but look at it through a cynical lens. I looked at the poll Konami posted, and Konami is eyeing remakes of the games that are already great and that the fans love. Why do you want the dev time and resources to be poured onto the stuff that has already been done? If I really want nostalgia, I can go play the classics again. Then I saw how many people are calling for a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake, but I have not seen a single good proposal on how you go about remaking it into a modern game. Shadow Moses is too interior and cramped for the new Metal Gear gameplay, which was created with a more open area in mind. This was already a problem with MGS4 when it revisited Shadow Moses and even Twin Snakes, where you could just trank all the guards afar in the FPS mode. Just a shift from the mechanics of MGS1 to MGS2 broke the gameplay. What do you think would happen if they added the MGS5 mechanics? The only solution is to completely rework the levels design to fit the new mechanics, but then there's the problem where MGS1's level design is one of the most recognizable video game spaces to the point where it has been directly canonized by MGS4. MGS1 is too ingrained in the PS1 visual aesthetics, gameplay, perspective, and iconic status. It would be like remaking Ocarina of Time into a Breath of the Wild clone. Even if it's good, it would come across as offensive, especially when its original creator is not even involved. Then how many newcomers would be confused with the MGS1 remake? They just played a game about Big Boss, and then there is a 40-year time skip to get introduced with this new Solid guy, who already had all his confrontations with Big Boss in the MSX games they never even heard about. Remember, Metal Gear Solid was a sequel to Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, and meant to be the finale to the series. It would be like watching The Phantom Menace and then watching The Force Awakens. The reason why I cared about the MGS3 remake but got disappointed by the result is because the original was not a perfect game and in many ways is a missed potential trapped in the PS2 hardware. It had the potential to be decent or the potential to be a lazy remaster disguised as a remake akin to The Last of Us remake, and Delta turned out to be the latter. The list of elements how the remake could update and improve upon the original were not fulfilled. Other than some quality of life features, it isn't improved in terms of game design. It is for the players who want to count more pixels on screen. If it's too faithful and basically one-to-one, what is the point of remaking it? I can just play the Master Collection anytime. However, there is one game that's missing from the Konami poll. One game that is perfect for a remake. The one that fans would not expect, but is necessary in reviving the Metal Gear brand. It makes perfect sense as a follow-up to the MGS3 remake. Metal Gear Solid, Portable Ops, a PSP sequel/spin-off to MGS3. It needs to be remade not because it's as great, but flawed as a missed potential, and here's why. For one, Portable Ops is not a Hideo Kojima game. He was a producer, who oversaw the development and provided the premise, but he didn't direct, write, or design the game, therefore, his name is not on the cover. A remake of Portable Ops will come across as less offensive than remaking the mainline installments like MGS1. It is considered the black sheep of the franchise, and its canonicity has been questioned and contradicted by the future installments as well. It was already more of a Konami game than a Kojima game, so it would essentially be Konami remaking their own game rather than remaking someone else's game. Kojima made his take on Portable Ops with its sequel, Peace Walker, which improved upon the core gameplay idea it pioneered. MGS5 further ran with the tactical espionage operations idea from Portable Ops, so if it were the game from any other franchise, I wouldn't be wishing for a remake. However, in terms of the plot, Portable Ops story-wise is an actual missing link between MGS3 and Metal Gear 1, more so than MGS5. How did Naked Snake, this solitary CIA agent, become Big Boss, an inspirational military leader leading a private army? Peace Walker doesn't show that, he already starts out a boss of his private army. Portable Ops shows that. How did he get the inspiration, budget, and backing to create such a mercenary organization? Portable Ops shows that. The first Metal Gear, Portable Ops shows that. This is not even mentioning stuff like how it sets up the groundworks for MGS4's reveal. Even the fan services like how Big Boss got to know Colonel Campbell makes more sense. It at least works better as fan service than introducing Otacon's father to Big Boss life. However, as a cohesive whole, the game is not great. The PSP hardware limitations hold it back worse than Peace Walker, such as the controls and the level design. Peace Walker was designed around the PSP hardware, whereas Portable Ops borrows MGS3's core gameplay and tries to fit PSP. The MGS3 controls were already archaic, and imagine playing it with only one analog stick. In particular, the repetitiveness of kidnapping the enemy NPCs is unbearable without the Fulton recovery system. Having to kidnap every enemy to the truck is already tedious, but doing that with the slow dragging system from MGS3, not even carrying an enemy, just playing it, you can imagine how much this could have been better if it wasn't a PSP game. There's so much that the 2025 technology can improve upon if they take time and care with it while keeping the premise intact. I view most remakes to be largely soulless cash grabs, and I often prefer a straight-up remaster for preservation. That is why I want Konami to not remake already great games. A good premise and bad bones are prime for a remake. Silent Hill 4, Code Veronica, Golden Abyss, Lost Planet, Shadow of Memories, and Portable Ops. No one cares about these games enough, which means they can do whatever they want to improve it. MGS1 doesn't have the same flexibility. The Delta remake could propose a reimagined MGS game that is loosely based on Portable Ops, changing many things but leaving the general idea similar. Think of Fire Emblem Echoes. It was a full-on remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden, a unique but flawed and overlooked entry with a cult following, with the modernization to make it like Awakening and Fates, and it was financially successful. Since the MetalGearSolid, Portable Ops title sounds like a cheap portable spin-off like MGS Mobile or Acid, let's make a little change to the title. Other than the obvious benefits like the MGS5 mechanics, the real game-changer the remake could bring would be the world system from MGS5. And I'm not referring to the Phantom Pain. I'm referring to Ground Zeroes. Many people have said they had more fun playing Ground Zeroes because of the more sophisticated mission and map design, compared to the more barren open world of the Phantom Pain, where you spend 5 minutes sprinting across the empty deserts. There are too many empty space. You get an alert, run away, and it's like nothing happened. It's frustrating to start a mission with D-Horse, only to abandon it once you get to the mission arena only to switch to D-Dog or Quiet. Roaming the open world is a waste of time because it's too empty, finding a few outposts that house a few guards and some resources. It's not only faster to just do a mission, go back to Pequod, and select another mission, but you also replenish your stuff without having to do a supply drop, which costs more resources. Camp Omega had less filler. There's as much variety in this one area as one open world in the Phantom Pain. Change of day affects how the player can tackle patrols and gives more creativity in the area. Navigational puzzles like Deja Vu and having to deduce where to go through the tape recording, vertical design with multiple floors, each region in the base serving a distinct role in aiding the player, and the advanced surveillance systems like CCTV cameras. The Phantom Pain didn't have much of that because of its focus on the open wild nature environments. Well, you get the perfect material to recreate the feeling of infiltrating Camp Omega with Portable Ops because the entire game takes place in the base. Portable Ops' dense industrial backdrop resembling MGS 1 and 2 would provide a different experience. I imagine the game to be structured like Ground Zeroes. Instead of a half-baked, stretched-out open world, it's a series of crammed open levels. You go back to the same location, but it has different patrols, different weapons, different vehicles, and different surveillance systems. You play the same locations, but feel like any small change will keep you on your toes. Its more focused map design allows the game to have more variety and details than plastering a flat terrain with 1 or 2 buildings and filling them with 5 or 6 guards. The gaps between strategic points in the map are narrower, less empty spaces. Higher verticality also means you have more fun moving around to find new infiltration points. Opening shortcuts like finding a control room to open a giant gate and sabotaging security systems could be additions to give the player more thought in traversal. With this system present, it doesn't even need the Fulton recovery system like Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain. Like Ground Zeroes, the faster carrying over shoulder system, while still being able to run and shoot, and calling the chopper to board the soldiers would lessen the tedium. Portable Ops also features the disguise mechanic, where you send the soldiers you kidnap to walk into any level and the unsuspecting guards. The disguise was already present in the previous titles like MGS 2 and 3. But Portable Ops tries to do something like Hitman, where the player's disguise only works on a certain group that shares the same rank. There is the entire process of preparing for the infiltration, which soldier to use, casing the joint, how you use this soldier, securing access to new areas, moving everything into position, and executing the infiltration. Using the disguise system, the player creates a staging ground to nudge things according to their own plan. This is why the Hitman games are so fun and have so much replay value. The only fault of that series is the lackluster sneaking mechanics. To this date, Hitman still hasn't moved past its clunkiness, as Agent 47 feels as weightless as ever. If this disguise mechanic is combined with MGS5's stealth mechanics, you have a flexible puzzle box for the player to account for infinite possibilities and create their own narratives. It would be like Hitman, only if it had the same level of range in terms of movement and features the list of gadgets that make the game super fun to screw around. It is a shame MGS5 didn't have the disguise system, but a possible Portable Ops remake can. Let's imagine a scenario like this. The player learns that the patrols are about to switch off in this area. Then you go there to do a mission, only to learn that they are doing a surprise party or a show to boost the morale of the troops, like the Playmate scene from Apocalypse Now, so the guards take over the unexpected patrol shifts. You have various options, such as disguising yourself to get through the party because the guards are looser than normal, or staying hidden long enough so that the guards one by one slip out to attend the party, making the infiltration route open to you to complete the mission. To mention the other stealth action games the hypothetical Portable Ops remake could borrow from, I imagine the support system and enemy network system from Ghost Recon, Wildlands and Far Cry 5 could be implemented to deepen the squad system from Portable Ops. Those games have a non-linear structure in how the player tackles this massive, elaborate cartel/cult network. Everything you do is about taking down this enemy network as a guerrilla, destabilizing each region by neutralizing certain targets, sabotaging, finding documents, stealing resources, interrogating, and freeing prisoners. You are in constant engagement with the core gameplay loop without breaking it because all activities are cohesively building up to decrease the enemy influence in the region. This is also tied to the support system where you help local rebels to gain their trust to help you at the moment-to-moment gameplay, like calling a bombardment, reinforcement, and scouting the area. The friendly support system was already what I wanted to see from MGS5, and it would fit the setting of Portable Ops perfectly with Snake recruiting his men to take back the base. It works because Portable Ops is a Far Cry-like premise more than the other Metal Gear games. The player gets kidnapped by the cult-like paramilitary organization, but they escape and begin to mobilize the rebels to fight back in the guerrilla warfare. It also enhances the story because it is about Big Boss rising from a lone agent to a legendary military leader. After forming the rebel army and clearing the initial jungle levels that serve as the interconnected pieces within the overarching map. It's basically Peace Walker's structure rather than the Phantom Pain's open world, where you move between different, bite-sized areas to complete your objectives, but imagine each of those bite-sized areas on the size of Camp Omega. Let's call it a zone. In the overarching map, you can see which are the liberated zones and which are occupied zones. More zones the player clears and expands, the player can access deeper into the enemy-occupied zones nearby, allowing the player to capture deeper enemy bases to accommodate more troops and units. This follows a risk of enemy inspections afterwards, exposing them. The player can give direct orders to their troops to guard the liberated zones or attack the enemy-occupied zones. This means the player has to manage their operations, much like Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain, but without the mother base. Rather than doing that on an offshore plant that is separate from the game world, your base of operations is on the game levels themselves. The player has to think about which enemy zone, which base, which region to capture on the strategic level. Think of Dynasty Warriors Empires and Galactic Conquest from Battlefront. The support units and troops appear on the game levels themselves. The player is occasionally forced to head over and help defend the liberated zones from the enemy assaults with the support troops the player recruited as they played, and if it's too hopeless, the player has to order a withdrawal. The enemies can capture your important officers and characters like Campbell and Jonathan, and they will be brought deeper into the enemy territory, in which case you have to infiltrate and take them back. During the missions or capturing an enemy zone, if you liberated a number of zones within that area, they can help your infiltration or combat. Let's say you liberate a zone that has intelligence equipment, and you get data that improves your planning, such as information about the enemy strength, equipment, stats, and locations of the supply buildings, POWs, and targets in the zones within that region. The more personnel you place in the intel zone, the more information you can access, such as the field radar, patrol routes, and marking enemies. However, if the intel zone is occupied by Jean's army, they will know about the same details about you, which will make them to attack your most vulnerable zones or zones that have the important characters, like Campbell or Jonathan. If you liberate a zone that has artillery, the next time you are active around that region, you can call the artillery strikes, and vice versa as well. If the enemy is occupying the artillery zone, they will send an artillery strike against you if you get spotted. If you liberate the region's airfield zone, the player can call the chopper that fulfills the same role as Morpho and Pequod in MGS5. If the enemy is occupying, there will be enemy helicopters patrolling the zones within the region or attacking your forces during the offensive. If you liberate the armory zone, the player's forces in the region will equip with better weapons and armor, which help them fight the enemy easier in the battlefields during the offensive and defensive. If the enemy is occupying the armory zone, then the enemy in that region will be wearing helmets, heavy armor, and have more CQC specialists, landmines, decoy, better firepower, much like MGS5's adaptive enemy system. The elements that used to be scripted and set pieces in the previous Metal Gear games can be dynamic, emergent gameplay scenarios like XCOM. Out of all the mainline Metal Gear games, Portable Ops is the one game they could get away with completely rewriting from a narrative perspective. Konami treated it as a lower-budgeted portable title, created as a spin-off to build up for MGS4. Peace Walker, despite being a portable game, wasn't like that. It was called Metal Gear Solid 5 during the production phase and given much higher attention from Konami. The game lacks memorable set pieces unlike the other Metal Gear games, and not just the gameplay set pieces, but the story moments. Kojima's absence is very noticeable. It lacks the unique Kojima touch, his humor and campiness. As much as I don't like Peace Walker's story, at least I can remember a handful of moments ingrained in my brain. The slideshow cutscene direction hampers the emotional resonance, and much of the story is told through exposition rather than shown. Other than Jean, every character is tacked on. Jonathan's death means greatly for Big Boss character, but his presence is limited in the game. Cunningham could be explored in depth rather than treated as another boss to fight. Elisa and Ursula are on paper interesting, but lack enough weight to make her memorable. The game doesn't do enough to capitalize on her split personality. The same goes for Campbell, Python, Ocelot, as well as pointless fan service like bringing back Sokolov alive and Frank Yeager, which I will get to later. We don't feel Jean's rebellion. We don't feel the scale of this event because, again, it's a PSP game. It kind of schemes over many details and characterizations that could have highlighted Snake's arc and rivalry with Jean. This is where a modern presentation could elevate it. One of the strengths of MGS5's episodic structure is how it could flesh out individual characters through smaller contained stories separate from the main plotline. It takes a more visual and gameplay approach to characterization rather than the expositional dialogue. The characters are conveyed through expressions and body language. Cinematography, small cutscenes, and gameplay are there to humanize each main character and define them with the way they move, react, talk, walk. For example, Portable Ops starts out with Naked Snake already captured by Jean's men and thrown into the prison. If the remake has a proper budget, you can visualize how Snake was captured in the opening. While on duty, Big Boss Squad gets ambushed in the jungle by the game's bosses, like Cunningham and Ursula. Have the ambush scene play as a supernatural horror sequence like the Phantom Pain's hospital escape sequence in a way to establish the villains. I can imagine a sequence blending the military horror of Predator and the Revenant's uninterrupted cinematography. We could also see how Jean's rebellion played out and took over the base. Make things more direct. Adding the cassette tape narrative device from Peace Walker and MGS5 would have us hear the recorded banter between the characters. Add the side ops that could flesh out the cast, like the underdeveloped allies like Campbell and Jonathan, and the side villains like Python, Cunningham, and Elisa. Elisa's ESP and psychic abilities could be put to a great extent like the Sorrow and Psycho Mantis in the creepy boss fight, floating around, breaking the fourth wall, and hurling objects. I would also ditch Elisa's premonition scene, where Big Boss and Solid Snake are prophesied. It is apparently considered the highlight of the game, and I wholeheartedly disagree. I tend to dislike using a prophecy in narrative, and I feel the same way here. It devalues the choices these characters make and why they make them. It's like Big Boss is going down the dark path and Solid Snake is saving the world all because it was destined that they would. It lessens the thematic weight of Solid Snake struggling and eventually overcoming his genes and destiny. A more interesting potential is to expand the returning characters like Paramedic and Sigint. These characters are supposed to be the villains, hinted in MGS4, but never given any time to develop. They go from the movie buff and the guy who dreams about poop.
Whatever it hits, people, trees, buildings, turns into shit!
To being the ultimate people behind the shadow group that controls the entire world with no exploration whatsoever. At least, Zero eventually got fleshed out in the Phantom Pain, even though they were done through the optional audio tapes. Portable Ops is the last game in the chronology where Big Boss had a fallout with his Snake Eater crew, so this is the chance to explore his relationship with Paramedic and Sigint and make it believable and emotional when we know what happens later on. Hint some darker side to these characters. Paramedic talks about her enthusiasm in the possibility of genetic manipulation, leading to her becoming Dr. Clark, who experiments on Gray Fox.
More efficient. You can't mass-produce human beings.
Maybe, but now that we know the true nature of genes, human cloning is that much closer to reality. Nuclear transplanting is already theoretically possible, so one day...
My genes are going to be a valuable commodity.
Exactly.
They'd never let that happen.
Just think, even if your body dies, you survive and go on to bigger and better accomplishments. If you think about it, it's kind of an honor.
Does that kind of technology seriously appeal to you?
Well, I am a doctor.
Sigint talks about his enthusiasm for ARPANET and predicts the internet, which he is hopeful about using it as a tool for the US to control the globe.
40 years from now, we'll be in the age of electronic warfare. It won't be long before information replaces firepower as the most valuable commodity on the battlefield.
So you're saying they won't need guys like me anymore?
Sorry to break it to you, but that's not gonna happen. No matter how advanced our technology gets, there's still no substitute for human beings. Anyway, the Major is a man of foresight. He knew the electronic age was coming, and so he called out to me.
And there is also Eva. In MGS3, Eva didn't get to really express her character. She was created as a satire of a Bond girl and Fujiko mine, and her entire purpose in the game is just that, to be a female spy who betrays Snake. The relationship is barely developed other than Snake being attracted to her boobs and Eva trying to seduce him for her mission. She is one note, a character being reduced to a single aspect. That is the entire point of her character. Her character exists only to influence Big Boss's character arc. Beyond that role, she isn't really explored or humanized, and instead has tons of character exposition. So when I played Portable Ops, I was delighted to play a significant mission involving Eva, explaining how she left China due to the threat of execution for her failure to obtain the Philosopher's Legacy, and how she later became a freelance cargo pilot but was shot down by a surface-to-air missile before she could land at the airport, resulting in her crash landing in the wilderness. After she is rescued by Snake, the two embrace and sleep together. Then, Eva becomes a recruitable character. However, just like with every other returning character, the game treats her on a surface level. She doesn't feel like an important presence, rather more of a bonus character tacked onto the random side mission. It does not feel like Eva became that enamored with Big Boss to become his follower, loyal enough to bear his clone. The remake could be a great opportunity to flesh out her character and relationship with Big Boss. Rather than a few codec conversations, Portable Ops could be rewritten as an opportunity to humanize her, as well as explore her relationship with Big Boss, and make it believable. What does Eva think of Snake without a mission to seduce Snake? Who is Eva beyond a hot girl femme fatale persona? Who is Eva when she is kicked out of her espionage agency after failing to retrieve the legacy? Bring something new to her characterization, like what they did with Gray Fox, who was introduced in Metal Gear 2 to a tragic figure in MGS1. Eva should have a similar awakening as Big Boss when she was abandoned by her own country. Now working as a mercenary, Big Boss hires her onto his team. Have her play a crucial part in taking over the base. She is no longer using her seductive charm to manipulate Snake and achieve her goals because she is not on the mission. Instead, this time their relationship is genuine and proper, building upon the hints of that established in MGS3. In that process, Eva grows loyal to Snake. You could even convey her appearance to represent the first proxy war between the American and Chinese philosophers. The characters like Campbell, Eva, Paramedic, Sigint, and Jonathan all can serve as the buddies, similar to MGS5. The player can pick which buddy to bring with or station to certain zones. Let's say you are about to infiltrate the enemy airfield, so you head to a nearby ridge where you order Jonathan to station with a sniper rifle. He can provide cover like Quiet from MGS5. You can bring Eva, who is a master spy, so she can disguise and approach the enemies that way, or have her use her charms to distract the guards, allowing you to sneak easier. You can allocate Paramedic to somewhere in a region, so when the enemies begin attacking that region, zones there have a bonus health buff, so your troops won't die easily. When you are about to infiltrate the enemy zone, you can allocate Sigint to a nearby liberated zone, so he provides great intelligence, such as the location of the armory and which enemy soldier has great stats. This way, the player feels attachment to these characters through the gameplay, much like Quiet. It's only with MGS5 that Kojima finally understood that you don't need extensive expositions in order to convey to the players what they can feel simply by playing the game. Portable Ops could do something similar. And I'm sure some of the fans will be typing in the comments that MGS4 retconned it. In MGS4, Eva told us that she and Big Boss crossed paths again since Operation Snake Eater in Vietnam, not in Colombia.
After years on the run, I ended up in Hanoi. That's where I met him again.
MGS4 provides no context about what Snake and Eva were doing in Vietnam, but regardless, her appearance in Portable Ops is not canon. And I agree, so here comes a more radical departure the remake of Portable Ops can make. Set it in Vietnam rather than Colombia. Portable Ops serves as a nice opportunity for the series to touch upon the topic of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam setting fits perfectly with the canon as well. According to the lore in the game itself, Big Boss is said to have joined the Vietnam War, with Python being his former comrade that fought with him. Obviously, there is one line acknowledged in Peace Walker.
Finally, we can leave all that crap in San Geronimo behind.
But I think it can be treated as a light discrepancy in the same way Liquid Ocelot said.
Big Boss was in his late 50s when they created his copies.
And Solid Snake saying Big Boss told him.
No, wait. There was a man who said he was my father.
Where is he?
Dead. By my own hand. Big Boss.
Even though he said no such thing in Metal Gear 2. In addition, Miller's San Hieronimo line could be remedied by the eventual Peace Walker remake, which will probably happen in some time. However, you might ask how Gene got a nuke when it takes place in Vietnam. In the game's plot, Gene seizes the Soviet military base abandoned after the Cuban Missile Crisis and tries to launch the Soviet nukes at the US to destroy the philosophers. Considering no nuclear weapons were deployed in Vietnam, would Portable Ops plot even work with the change of setting? Although the US wasn't close to using nukes in the Vietnam War, there was serious consideration of it. The idea rolled up the chain of command early on until it hit the White House. There were high-level advocates for it in the White House, such as Vice President Nixon and the Secretary of Defense, who supported it as a means to stop communism in Southeast Asia, but Eisenhower was against it. Johnson shut down the military's contingency plan for the employment of nukes in the Vietnam War, but when Nixon became the president in 1968, he and Henry Kissinger actively explored nuclear options and engaged in nuclear threats in order to end the Vietnam War. So in Metal Gear's heightened, over-the-top version of the Cold War, it wouldn't be that far-fetched to have a secret US military base in Vietnam that has nuclear warheads, stored just in case the Soviet and Chinese forces directly intervene and the Cold War turns hot. Such a secret nuclear base also makes sense of why there are so many special forces like Fox, high-level security, and sci-fi weaponry, because the US government wouldn't want the world to know that they stored nukes in Vietnam. Gameplay-wise, it is a recall of MGS3's jungle survival gameplay, providing a nice balance to the more industrial setting of the military base. Not only does it allow Konami to reuse the art assets from the MGS3 remake, reducing the budget and time, it can build upon further. This makes navigating through the thick, foggy jungle and locating where the objective is part of the gameplay. It provides extreme environmental conditions, such as rain, heat, all accounted to the stamina system from MGS3, which should be re-implemented here. The player or the enemy can set the environment on fire, much like Far Cry 2. Snake covers himself with mud or grass for sneaking. You could go further with stealth and traversal systems, having the player consider things like temperature, booby traps, and disease. Maybe certain areas are toxic with the Agent Orange, and if you are exposed, your stamina drains faster. Story-wise, it is a great setting for a Big Boss game. This could serve as a place where he further cements his disillusionment with America as Big Boss witnesses how the US conducts the war and treats their soldiers like expendables. By 1970, public support for the war was at the bottom, and Nixon promised to end the war, but the war was only escalating. His ruthless bombing campaigns have caused countless deaths, and then he began invading Cambodia, and soldiers now question what they are even fighting for. The government lied to the soldiers about Agent Orange, causing cancer and illness to the unassuming soldiers. The veterans were treated like shit back home, abandoned by the society and the government. This not only gives Gene a personal motivation but also a reason why he was able to convince so many American soldiers to rebel. It makes more sense for a US Army unit commander to persuade the American troops than the Soviet Army personnel, which is how the original game played out. Gene is able to take over the US base deep in the jungle by blaming the Vietnam catastrophe on the national interest or the tactics of the ineffectual government. Gene could use this sentiment and try to persuade Big Boss to his side. As the Vietnam War showed, the US hasn't learned from its mistake of sacrificing the boss. They continue to throw away lives for power and control, victims of a corrupt system that sees people as tools. This rebellion happening in the backdrop of the Vietnam War makes way more sense than some random Soviet base in Colombia deciding to join Gene's revolt because reasons. If you think about it, the story of Portable Ops is similar to Apocalypse Now. Gene, the commander of Foxhound that was formed after Snake Eater, with his followers and US Metal Gear, starts a major revolt and tries to create Army's Heaven. Snake goes there to stop him. This could be a loose adaptation of Apocalypse Now in the Metal Gear universe. The remake could also heighten the implication that Big Boss is going after Foxhound, the very unit he is part of. In Apocalypse Now, Willard had complex feelings about going after Colonel Kurtz rather than the NVA or Viet Cong, and in Spec Ops, The Line, a loose adaptation of the same source material, mowing down the US soldiers rather than the brown people was the major plot and thematic point. You could give a similar conflict to Snake. By having the story set in the Vietnam War, Snake fought alongside the members of Foxhound as comrades. Snake is already acquainted with Gene, already formed a camaraderie relationship, but he has seen how Gene is gradually losing his mind throughout the endless quagmire. With the revolt broken out, Snake is forced to fight not the Vietnamese, but the US soldiers, the very same unit he was fighting for. Big Boss sympathizes with the enemies, creating a complex antagonistic relationship with those he is going after. So by the time Big Boss goes against the US forces in Peace Walker, it comes across as a natural evolution. The Vietnam setting also makes sense of the appearance of Frank Yeager as well. It is baffling that in the prequel games, you get so much backstory for Big Boss, but see none of what the Solid Snake games told to us. It's like a separate universe that tells a completely different backstory. For example, in the Solid games, we are constantly told that Gray Fox was Big Boss' right-hand man.
Big Boss's most trusted lieutenant, and the only member of Foxhound ever to receive the code name Fox. Gray Fox.
But if you only played the prequel games, you wouldn't even know his existence. In Metal Gear 2, Frank Yeager explains he first met Big Boss as a half-Vietnamese orphan child laborer in Vietnam, where half-whites were being sent into forced labor camps. Big Boss rescued and taught him to become his child soldier. He has a complex relationship with Big Boss. Big Boss rescued him, but yet he also exploited him. Frank resents Big Boss and betrays him, but respects him and rejoins him in Zanzibar. There is a wealth of content to create a great story. What was their first meeting like? Well, Portable Ops retcons that by telling us that he's just some white American experiment subject Big Boss met in Colombia. Wait, hold on, he wasn't experimented on until MGS1.
They were using a soldier for their gene therapy experiments.
I never heard that.
It happened right after you retired.
He was shown as a normal person in Metal Gear 1 and 2, so why is he an experimented super ninja like MGS1 in 1970? Fan service. That's why. The same way the game featured the returning characters like Sokolov, who shouldn't be alive in the first place. How Portable Ops utterly wastes his character is disappointing. He serves no purpose in the story. He's just some cool swordsman Big Boss happens to encounter. He plays no part in Big Boss's growth as a character. Imagining what their relationship was like in your head based on Gray Fox's dialogue in Metal Gear 2 is far more interesting than what Portable Ops showed to us. If the remake is set in Vietnam, you could make this piece of lore from Metal Gear 2 into an actual story. If you were to do a long-lost cyborg war friend-turned-boss trope, instead of having Frank appear as a genetic experimental subject, there is one character who takes a similar role as Gray Fox in Portable Ops. It's Python, Big Boss battle comrade, presumed dead until he reappears as a genetically modified boss. Let's say once Python joins Big Boss, he requests him to rescue his son. For the sake of the video, I will give him a real name, Gregor Yeager, inspired by Gray Fox's MGS1 voice actor, Greg Eagles. Greg is also one alphabet away from Gray. During the early phase of the US involvement, Gregor Yeager was dispatched as a covert operative alongside Snake in the early 60s, but was injured. In the hospital, he has fallen in love with a Vietnamese nurse, recalling Otacon's love blooming on the battlefield line. Years later, he returned to Vietnam as a Fox operative when the US decided to deploy large-scale ground troops and tried to look for his lover. He learned she was captured by the Viet Cong not long after he came back to America. Ever since then, Gregor has been looking for her. Big Boss, however, is unable to help him since he is too busy with taking down Gene's army. As the story progresses, during the Cunningham boss fight, Gregor sacrifices himself to save Big Boss. In his dying breath, Gregor asks Big Boss to look for his lover. Wanting to fulfill his last wish, Big Boss and Sigint together trail the captured nurse and realize that she birthed a son, and both of them are held captive in a North Vietnamese labor camp. Make him younger, let's say, 10 to 12 rather than a teenager. Infiltrating there, Big Boss attempts to rescue both the nurse and her son, but the mother is shot during the escape, leaving the rescued boy orphaned. Initially, Big Boss is protective of the boy, but is having difficulty connecting with him because he cannot speak English. He was born in the prison camp and lived most of his life there, so he can only speak Vietnamese. This is where you can depict him in a similar manner to Quiet in MGS5. The boy is introduced as a character that cannot speak English, so his character is conveyed through his expressions and body language. It is an unusual way of portraying a relationship, but that just only adds to his character. As both try to communicate with each other without words, he brings out a rare side of Big Boss, which is that he is trying to be a guardian like a foster father, a side that otherwise is not really seen throughout the series. The boy eventually adopts his first name, Frank, and uses his body language to get his boiling rage across, which is revenge. He soon begins training himself. Big Boss tries to make him stay away, so he does some of the tasks on his behalf, targeting the North Vietnamese officers who were the sadistic prison guards. When Big Boss eventually gets to the NVA prison ward responsible of killing Frank's mother, Frank sneaks out and follows along in secret. Big Boss gets captured by the NVA forces, but Frank, using his smaller body, infiltrates the prison through a tunnel and frees Big Boss. Earning Big Boss respect, they both ambush the NVA prison ward, responsible for killing Frank's mother. Big Boss hands Frank a sword to avenge his mother. In anger, Frank violently hacks him to death, as Big Boss watches over, which foreshadows Gray Fox's ninja trait later in the series as well as hinting Big Boss' darker side. It is a twisted parallel of Solid Snake giving Raiden the sword, contrasting exactly where Big Boss went wrong compared to Solid. Big Boss bonding with Frank Yeager causes a shift in his thinking. The victims of war never get just treatment, even when the war is over for them. Big Boss realizes a battle could give these kids a better life, a sense of purpose. When the story ends, Big Boss sends Frank back to America. He tells Frank he could join him later, but until then, train. This sets up Peace Walker, where Big Boss is a lot more casual about recruiting Chico as a child soldier. Admittedly, this slightly contradicts Gray Fox's dialogue in Metal Gear 2, in which he says Big Boss rescued him after the war, not during the war, but this can be treated as Frank misspoke, in the same way as how Liquid Ocelot misspoke.
Big Boss was in his late 50s when they created his copies.
It is worth a trade-off with a small retcon. My pitch of creating the metagame system about an army management akin to Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain is very much rooted in a do-it-your-own-way premise of the tactical action operations games. Create a band of private mercenaries, manage it like a corporation, select which quests to do, and screw around and gather stuff in the hub worlds on your time. The characters are in the safe haven, detached from the field, waiting for a story event. This also means the stories in those games tend to be not as urgent as the tactical action espionage games, which are about constant momentum, high stakes, and constant action. MGS1 has the terrorists threatening the US with the nuke, MGS2 was about the terrorists threatening to unleash the environmental disaster, and MGS3 was about destroying the Shagohod to avoid the World War III. Taking place in a few days, the protagonist is on the constant journey with the ticking deadline looms ahead, and the plot and characters built alongside toward the climax, like a traditional Bondian spy action narrative. The thing about Portable Ops is that it is a mix of both. It is about management and metagame, but Big Boss does not get his own safe haven. It is about Big Boss recruiting his men to form an army, but the plot is about Gene preparing the nuclear launch on the US. I think this is why Portable Ops is not as memorable because it sits on the uncomfortable fence, failing to excel at either of these two. As a compromise, a time limit system akin to Dead Rising, Pikmin, and Majora's Mask could add much needed desperation and tension to what the player is doing, forcing the player to finish the story before the end of 1970, when Gene says he will unleash the nuke. If the player fails to reach the final area, where the climax happens, you get a game over, in which case you can go back to one of the save points. The player cannot screw around and carry every single guard to recruit. However, the player can delay the deadline by sabotaging certain enemy objects. Let's call them the enemy war machine, and these include fuel tanks, Metal Gear parts, blueprints, engineers, warhead parts. These are scattered in various zones, where the player can infiltrate and destroy on their own without the main ops telling them to do so. In order to know the whereabouts of these war machines, obtaining the intelligence is critical, done through stealing the enemy documents and placing the intelligence personnel in the zones nearby. The player is forced to think about which ops to do, which zone to target, which document to pick, which soldiers to recruit. Every defeat is a setback. For example, you infiltrate the enemy territory to sabotage the Metal Gear part to delay the looming deadline. There is not enough time. While you are on this objective, you receive a message that the enemies have begun attacking the liberated zone, in which your precious crew members like Sigint are stationed. If that zone falls, Sigint is captured, and he is crucial in boosting the player's intelligence capability that allows you to locate the war machines. So do you call off sabotaging the Metal Gear part and head straight to help defending Sigint? Or do you let that area fall, sacrificing Sigint, to keep sabotaging the Metal Gear part? Or are you confident in your skills and speed to do both? In other words, it makes the player think like a commander in a war, weighing what to sacrifice. What is the lesser evil? This has been my basis for how you could go about remaking Portable Ops. A remake that doesn't just update the graphics or add the MGS5 mechanics, but completely overhauling it to fulfill the concept put forward by the original game, while feeling like a new entry to the saga. I am aware they might come across as too risky and ambitious, but I do think that's what Konami needs right now rather than selling nostalgia. One thing I respected about Kojima is that it's his ability to try new things, not just the story, but the gameplay. Every MGS game is different with different sets of mechanics and gameplay ideas. MGS3's gameplay is different from 1 and 2. MGS2 mechanics in MGS3 wouldn't work, just like MGS2 mechanics wouldn't work for MGS3. Then the core gameplay evolution between MGS3 and 4 and Peace Walker and MGS5 are all drastically different. Every Metal Gear after MGS2 was him experimenting with different type of stealth ideas, playing around the new ways of game design instead of creating more of the same, and taking the easy way out like the other series. I do believe the ideas I outlined in the hypothetical Portable Ops remake is aligned with this mindset, extruding from the concepts from the original game, while feeling like a next step to where MGS5 left off. Kojima did indeed toyed with the ideas of remaking the previous MGS games, but had he been in charge of the remakes, I very much doubt he would have just updated the graphics, added in the MGS5 controls, and called it a day. If you have your own ideas about how to remake Portable Ops, I would like to hear your thoughts.